Hello, everyone, and welcome to our academic lesson number 3. This is week 3 of our virtual learning. This is for the week of April 6th to the 10th. For this week, we are going to be working with the reading standard RL 1.3, which indicates I can analyze how characters develop over the course of a text, interact with other characters, and advance the plot or develop the theme. So essentially, our goal is to just better understand how characters develop and impact the stories in which they exist. This is review for everyone. Your task that you are responsible for this week, the first one is to respond to the attendance question. Second one is your Achieve article for the week, which is called A Circus with No Elephants. You are going to be reading a text called The Leap by Louise Erdrich. And so you have a pre-reading activity, a during reading activity, and a post-reading activity. And lastly, you have an independent reading log. That's the same structure that we have had for the last 2 weeks. That has stayed the same. So the first task, go ahead and pause the video here if you have not completed the attendance question for the week. So the question of the week is, what is the scariest thing that you have ever done? Write at least 2 complete sentences and post your answer by April 10th to be marked present for this week. Second thing is, of course, your Achieve article. Remember that you need to get at least a 75% or higher for this to count. So we are continuing with our unit of survival. So last week we began that unit. And as you should remember that survival is defined as the state or fact of continuing to live or exist, typically in spite of an accident, ordeal, or difficult circumstances. So last week we read a text called Deep Survival by Lawrence Gonzalez, and we learned about what is required of those who aim to overcome the obstacles encountered in a fight to stay alive. So this week we'll continue with that focus on survival in the midst of a dangerous adventure. So we're going to learn about the concept of survival through the lens of a risk taker. Her name is Anna Avalon, a former trapeze performer, and her persistence to survive against all odds. So as you guys know, and I just want to remind you of this, we went through this last week, but strong readers are mindful of the different techniques that authors employ to build a heightened understanding of the characters that we read about. So I just want to quickly go over what characterization is. So characterization is just the process by which the writer reveals the personality of a character. Characterization is revealed through direct characterization and indirect characterization. So direct characterization, it's explicitly stated. It says exactly what the character is like. The audience is told. Indirect characterization, we kind of have to figure it out. So it shows things that reveal the personality of the character, and they're usually implied. There are 5 different aspects of indirect characterization referred to as steal. Now, that should be review for you. We've done this before during the school year. So what is steal? This is going to be review. So steal is speech, thoughts, effects on others, actions, and looks. So speech is, of course, what the character says and how that character speaks. Thoughts are how the character feels and what might the character have on his or her mind in certain situations. Effects on others just has to do with how other characters feel or behave in reaction to that character that we are analyzing. And actions, what does the character do? How do they behave? And lastly, looks, what does the character look like? Sometimes that is described outright. Also, how does the author make that character appear? So if we are deepening our understanding of a character, the character is brought to life. As characters become more real to us, we become more engaged in that reading experience and find interest in how that story is going to unfold and what's going to happen. So it's the same thing with when we get invested in a certain type of movie. So just think about it for a second. Turn and talk to maybe your mom or someone that's in the house. Just think about your favorite movie. Who is your favorite character? Why did you like them? And were you invested in them? And did you care what happened to them? Did you want to know more and keep watching because of the way that they are acting or certain things that they said? basically just what made you really interested in them. Just turn and talk for a second and talk to someone, or just talk, think to yourself. That's fine too. Okay, I just want you to think about that and get that as your sort of warm up here. Okay, so this is the actual warm up. This is the before reading activity. So go ahead and access assignment 3A um, on your assignment here. It's going to look like this. The highlighted part, it's in pink. Okay, so this has to do with a YouTube video that I'm going to have you guys watch. It's called Duo Transcend Trapeze Act Stunt Goes Wrong. So go ahead and copy and paste this link into your browser so that you can watch the video. And then meet me back here on your actual assignment, but pause the video here so you can watch this YouTube video. Okay, so let's get ready to knock out our pre-reading activity. This is assignment 3A. As you already know, strong readers always aim to understand the full meaning of what is written and build personal connections within the text. With this in mind, I want you guys to look at this assignment. Follow along as I read the directions for this activity. Review the following quote to ponder, seem to imagine, and question to consider. In the space below, write your response to the highlighted question to consider. This is our quote to ponder. My mother once said that I'd be amazed at how many things a person can do within the act of falling. Perhaps at the time, she was teaching me to dive off a board at the town pool, for I associated the idea with mid-air somersaults. But I also think she meant that even in that awful doomed second one could think of, for she certainly did. Now imagine this scene. You are on the stage performing a dangerous trapeze stunt that has gone wrong despite your practice and skill. Suddenly, you find yourself falling mid-air. Now, this is the question that we must consider and respond to with that in mind. What are the thoughts that you believe rush into the mind of a person who is mid-air, falling rapidly towards the ground? Before reading the story, what do you believe the character's mother meant when referencing all of the things a person can do within the act of falling? So what does this mean? Okay, so this quote here comes from the text that we're about to read, but I just want to give you kind of a warm up to get your brain going. Okay, so think about this concept here and tell me what you think that the mother is meaning and what you believe that character's mother meant. Okay, so just write a couple of sentences here. It doesn't have to be long, maybe 2 to 3 sentences here, and pause the video here while you're writing. Okay, so before we get started, I want to go over the essential question. How does Louise Edrich characterize Anna Avalon in The Leap? Okay, The Leap, once again, is the text that we're going to be reading, and our purpose for reading is that we need to focus on what we can learn about that character, Anna Avalon, through the author's description of her speech, thoughts, effects, actions, and looks. Okay, that's STEAL acronym. We also want to consider the relationship between this week's text and last week's text. Okay, so we're making that connection. So when you're ready, I want you guys to locate assignment number 3 and prepare to complete the activity labeled assignment 3B, and you're going to read along with me. I'm going to pause periodically during the reading and offer explanations, ask you questions to build your understanding of the text and our essential questions. So be an active reader. Don't just go through it and scan. Okay. So when you're ready, go ahead and access that assignment. It's going to be down here. So I want you to remember that strong readers are mindful of those different techniques that authors employ to build that understanding of characters that we read about. So the whole purpose of this is that we are looking at characterization. That's the standard that we're looking at. So once again, characterization is the process by which the writer reveals the personality of the character. Remember, there is direct characterization, which the author tells us directly, and then there's also indirect characterization, which just means that we have to figure it out. Okay, so I want you guys to just take a look at this one here. Follow along as I read the directions. So while you're reading, use the graphic organizer below to track the aspects of Anna Avalon's indirect characterization in the story The Leap. Focus on the 5 elements: speech, thoughts, effects on others, actions, and looks. Be sure to include a reference for the page and line number for the examples that you include in the tracker, which will be helpful in completing your constructed response for assignment 3C, which is the next assignment. Now you'll notice that I have provided an example of how I'm processing what I see within the text. Okay, those examples that I've given you here. Remember our warm-up, which required us to ponder a quote within the story. I'm able to use this information to show the author's use of indirect characterization for Anna Avalon. In this one excerpt from the text, this one right here, I was able to identify some of Anna's speech, thoughts, and actions. Okay, these are her thoughts and her actions. The narrator said, "My mother once said that I'd be amazed at how many things a person can do within the act of falling." That's this one right here that I've already added in here. If this is not in your text, go ahead and add that right now. Okay, I'll pause for just a second. You can copy, just type this out onto your own document. Perhaps at the time she was teaching me to dive off a board at the town pool. I'm just continuing with this same quote that's up here. Okay, you don't have to put the whole thing. You can just put this here. "For I associated the idea with mid-air somersaults, but I also think she meant that even in that awful doomed second one could think, for she certainly did." This is from page 342, lines 90 to 91, in your case, 94 for the rest of the quote. So in reading this quote, I see that the narrator is telling me what Anna said to her, okay, which is naturally going to fall under character speech, which is right here. That's going to go under that column. I jotted this down, but there's a bit more to this line, okay? Mostly, I'm able to make an inference about Anna's thoughts or beliefs based on the speech that the daughter is referencing. The fact that Anna is faced with an awful sense of doom and believes that you can still think and engage in reflection suggests that Anna believes that we don't have to be crippled by fear or panic even when we find ourselves in a horrific situation. To say that you'd be amazed by the human capability leads me to believe that even in terror, there is still some level of strength and peace despite the circumstances. So I summarize that idea under the thoughts column. Okay, so I just put that same, this is continuing that same first quote, and I just summarized it here. It's part of the same thing here, 90 to 94. Please notice that I just continued that here. In the text, the narrator continues by mentioning that her mother, Anna, taught her how to dive off the board at the town pool, which is an action worth noting in our tracker. So while we read, we'll be on the lookout for the ways that the author develops Anna's characterization. Please note that there may be some elements of indirect characterization that the author does not use to characterize Anna Avalon. Okay, so if you are ready, let's get going here. I'm going to access my textbook. Remember that I have to go to the DCPS website. I'm going to click on popular links. I'm going to click on blended learning. When I get to the blended learning page, it will look like this. I'm going to go down to the My HRW and I will click on this. It will ask me for my DCPS login. I will click on student ebook and this will pop up. Please access page 339. It's right here, 339. That is where your text will be. Okay. All right, so this is a short story. This is not an informational text. This is just a fictional story, okay, by Louise Erdrich. My mother is the surviving half of a blindfold trapeze act. Not a fact I think about much, even now that she is sightless, the result of encroaching and stubborn cataracts. She walks slowly through her house here in New Hampshire, lightly touching her way along walls and running her hands over knickknacks, books, the drift of a grown child's belongings, and cast-offs. She has never upset an object or as much as brushed a magazine onto the floor. She has never lost her balance or bumped into a closet door left carelessly open. Okay, so Anna's described as being sightless, but never stumbles or bumps into anything with cat-like precision. Okay, so remember that the character that is being talked about, the mother, is Anna Avalon. So she's described already here, being sightless, never stumbles or bumps into anything. So I'm going to add that to my graphic organizer. So let's do that thing here where I have both pages side by side. It just makes it a little bit easier for me. Okay, so I'm going to just put her here. So I'm going to say Anna, oops, excuse me. Let's put it up here. Anna is sightless. Let's put a quote here. Sightless. Sightless, but never stumbles or bumps into anything with, and it says over here, they use this very interesting phrase, cat-like precision. Cat-like. That's this line here, cat-like precision. That comes from page 9. Lines, all of these here would be all the way to 1 through 10. Let's continue. It has occurred to me that the cat-like precision of her movements in old age might be the result of her early training, but she shows so little of the drama or flair one might expect from a performer that I tend to forget the flying Avalons. She has kept no sequin costume, no photographs, no flyers or posters from that part of her youth. I would, in fact, tend to think that all memory of double somersaults and heart-stopping catches had left her arms and legs, were it not for the fact that sometimes, as I sit chewing in the room of the rebuilt house in which I slept as a child, I hear the crackle, catch a whiff of smoke from the stove downstairs, and suddenly the room goes dark. The stitches burden beneath my fingers, and I am sewing with a needle of hot silver, a thread of fire. I owe her my existence 3 times. Okay, so this is an effect on other characters. This is her daughter talking. Remember, that's the narrator. And the character that we're looking at is Anna Avalon, which is the mother. So if the character here, the narrator is saying, I owe her my existence, then I'm going to add that as an effect on others. So I owe her my existence. I'm definitely going to add that here. Okay, that comes from page, what page is that? Let's see, 340. Okay, page 340. I'm going to add that over here, and that is line 22. The first when she saved herself. In the town square, a replica tent pole, cracked and splintered, now stands and cast in concrete. It commemorates the disaster that put our town smack on the front page of the Boston and the New York tabloids. It is from those old newspapers, now historical records, that I get my information. Not from my mother, Anna of the Flying Avalons, nor from any of her in-laws, nor certainly from the other half of her particular act, Harold Avalon, her first husband. In one news account, it says the day was mildly overcast, but nothing in the air or temperature gave any hint of the sudden force with which the deadly gale would strike. Okay, so this part here, not from my mother. The daughter is not getting any information of her mother, which is indicating that she doesn't really talk about her past very much. Okay, so she's having to look at these old newspapers, these historical records, for information about what happened there. Okay, so I'm going to add that into my thing here, my graphic organizer, and I'm just going to maybe put that as an action. Okay, an action that Anna, I don't have to put that in quotes, but Anna doesn't seem to about her past because daughter has to look at, and here's where my quote's going to come in, historical records / what was the other line that she used? Where was it? Historical records and old newspapers. Okay, that is from, once again, page 340. 40, and then that is line 30, 29, 28, 27, line 26. Line 26 to 20. The day was mildly overcast, but nothing in the air or temperature gave any hint of the sudden force with which the deadly gale would strike. I've lived in the West where you can see the weather coming for miles, and it is true that out here we are at something of a disadvantage. When extremes of temperatures collide, a hot and cold front winds generate instantaneously behind a hill and crash upon you without warning. That, I think, was the likely situation on that day in June. People probably commented on the pleasant air, grateful that no hot sun beat upon the striped tent that stretched over the entire center green. They bought their tickets and surrendered them in anticipation. They sat. They ate caramelized popcorn and roasted peanuts. There was time before the storm for 3 acts. The white Arabians of Alcazar rose on their hind legs and waltzed. The mysterious Bernie folded himself into a painted cracker tin, and the Lady of the Mist made herself appear and disappear in surprising places. As the clouds gathered outside unnoticed, the ringmaster cracked his whip, shouted his introduction, and pointed to the ceiling of the tent where the flying Avalons were perched. So obviously this is like a circus act, and so we are about to see these 3 acts. Okay. They loved to drop gracefully from nowhere like 2 sparkling birds and blow kisses as they threw off their plumed helmets and high-collared capes. They laughed and flirted openly as they beat their way up again on the trapeze bars. In the final vignette of their act, they actually would kiss mid-air, pausing, almost hovering as they swooped past one another. On the ground between bows, Harry Avalon would skip quickly to the front rows and point out the smear of my mother's lipstick, just off the edge of his mouth. They made a romantic pair, all right, especially in the blindfold sequence. That afternoon, as the anticipation increased, as Mr. and Mrs. Avalon tied sparkling strips of cloth onto each other's faces, they puckered their lips in mock kisses, lips destined never again to meet. As one long, breathless article put it, the wind rose miles off, wrapped itself into a cone, and howled. There came a rumble of electrical energy, drowned out by the sudden roll of drums. One detail not mentioned by the press, perhaps unknown: Anna was pregnant at the time, 7 months and hardly showing. Her stomach muscles were that strong. It seems incredible that she could work high above the ground when any fall could be so dangerous, but the explanation, I know from watching her go blind, is that my mother lives comfortably in extreme elements. Okay, so that is something about that character. Okay, that's not speech, thoughts, effects, actions. What do we think? Take a second to think about that. Okay, hopefully you would have thought that this would be added to her looks because she was pregnant. So I'm going to add that here. So there's definitely a detail about Anna's pregnancy and her physical strength. Okay, so that comes from page 1, lines 66, 68. Okay, so I have quite a few things in here, and you are more than welcome to keep these answers, everything that I've put in here, but it is your responsibility to fill in the rest of these as you are reading along. I will continue reading the story, okay? So what I want you to do right now, I want you to scroll to the very top of your assignment. Under this part here, under due date, I want you to press enter, and I want you to type your favorite cereal. This probably sounds irrelevant, but you know that there is always a method to my madness. But right now, if you are listening, I want you to type out what your favorite cereal is. That's it. You can put whatever you want. Once you're done typing it, I want you to highlight that with your cursor, and I want you to just put it in just a color. I don't care what color, just highlight it in one of these colors. Okay, that's all I want you to do. And then we'll go back to the text. Okay, there is a method to my madness. If you are watching this video, you know me well enough to know that there is a reason for everything. Okay, So let's continue on the text. I am going to minimize this here, but feel free to pause the video wherever you need to if you find examples of speech, thoughts, effects, actions, and looks. I'm going to read through this text for the sake of reading through it. Please know that I have also attached a PDF version of this text. I know that last week some of you were having some issues accessing the textbook for some reason, so I've made it available that way as well. Okay. That afternoon, as the anticipation increased, as Mr. and Mrs. Avalon tied sparkling strips of cloth onto each other's face, and as they puckered their lips. Oh, I already read this one, so let's skip to this one. From opposite ends of the tent they waved, blind and smiling, to the crowd below. The ringmaster removed his hat and called for silence, so that the two above could concentrate. They rubbed their hands in chalky powder. Then Harry launched himself and swung once, twice, in huge calibrated beats across space. He hung from his knees, and on the third swing stretched wide his arms, held his hand out to receive his pregnant wife as she dove from her shining bar. It was while the two were in midair, their hands about to meet, that lightning struck the main pole and sizzled down the guy wires, filling the air with a blue radiance that Harry Avalon must certainly have seen through the cloth of his blindfold, as the tent buckled and the edifice toppled him forward, the swing continuing and not returning in its sweep, and Harry going down into the crowd with his last thought, perhaps, just a prickle of surprise at his empty hands. My mother once said that I'd be amazed at how many things a person can do within the act of falling. Okay, this right here, my mother once said, that is going to be the character's speech. Okay, so I would definitely put that into my graphic organizer here under speech. You can add another one here. I'm allowing you to do that because we have already done that here. Perhaps at the time she was teaching me to dive off a board at the town pool, for I associated the idea with mid-air somersaults. But I also think that she meant that even in the awful doomed second one could think, for she certainly did. When her hands did not meet her husband's, my mother tore her blindfold away. As she swept past her on the wrong side, she could have grasped his ankle, the toe end of his tights, and gone down clutching him. Instead, she changed direction. Her body twisted toward a heavy wire, and she managed to hang on the braided metal, still hot from the lightning strike. Her palms were burned so terribly that once healed they bore no lines, only the blank scar tissue of a quieter future. She was lowered gently to the sawdust ring just underneath the dome of the canvas roof, which did not entirely settle, but was held up on one end and jabbed through, torn, and still on fire in places from the giant spark, though rain and men's jackets soon put that out. Okay, so this part here, this is an action. When her hands did not meet her husband's, my mother tore her blindfold away, and instead of grabbing him, she changed direction. Her body twisted toward a heavy wire, and she managed to hang on the braided metal. So she chooses not to hang on to her husband. Okay, so that is something that you could add to your graphic organizer. Go ahead and pause your video here if you would like to do that. 3 people died, but except for her hands, my mother was not seriously harmed until an overeager rescuer broke her arm in extricating her, and also, in the process, collapsed a portion of the tent bearing a huge buckle that knocked her unconscious. She was taken to the town hospital, and there she must have hemorrhaged, for they kept her confined to her bed a month and a half before her baby was born without life. Okay, so she was not harmed until a rescuer was trying to take her out, and the tent collapsed on her, and she passed out. Okay, she was taken to the hospital, and then she lost the baby that she was pregnant with. Harry Avalon had wanted to be buried in the circus cemetery next to the original Avalon, his uncle, so she sent him back with his brothers. The child, however, is buried around the corner beyond this house, just down the highway. Okay, this part here, Anna Avalon buries her child around near her house. That's an action. Sometimes I used to walk there just to sit. She was a girl, but I rarely thought of her as a sister or even as a separate person, really. I suppose you could call it the egocentrism of a child, of all young children, but I considered her a less finished version of myself. So remember that this is her daughter that she had later on. talking. Okay, so she had a sister who died. The dad that died, the other circus performer, he was not the narrator's dad. Okay, so that might be a little bit confusing right now, but you will see who her dad is shortly. Okay, so she's talking about the baby that died, and she was saying that that was her sister, but even though it was her sister, she didn't feel like it was a person. Okay. When the snow falls through shadows among the stones, I can easily pick hers out from the road, for it is bigger than the others, and in the shape of a lamb at rest, its legs curled beneath. The carved lamb looms larger as the years pass, though it is probably only my eyes, the vision shifting as what is close to me blurs and distances sharpen. In odd moments, I think it's the edge drawing near, the edge of everything, the unseen horizon we do not really speak of in the eastern woods. And it also seems to me, although this is probably an idle fantasy, that the statue is growing more sharply etched, as if, instead of weathering itself into a porous mass, it's hardening on the hillside with each snowfall, perfecting itself. So what she's talking about here is the gravestone. Okay, the narrator is just talking about the gravestone. It was during her confinement in the hospital that my mother met my father. He was called in to look at the set of her arm, which was complicated. He stayed, sitting at her bedside, for he was something of an armchair traveler and had spent his war quietly at an Air Force training grounds where he became a specialist in arms and legs broken during parachute training exercises. Anna Avalon had been to many of the places he'd longed to visit: Venice, Rome, Mexico, all through France and Spain. She had no family of her own and was taken in by the Avalons, trained to perform from a very young age. They toured Europe before the war, then based themselves in New York. She was illiterate. Okay, so that can be something that you add. There's a couple of things that you can add to your graphic organizer here. Definitely one that she was well traveled. Okay, you can put that under actions. Okay, and that she was illiterate. That is, what can we put that under? I guess you could put that under actions as well. It's not really an action, but it's still describing her. Actually, put that under that she was illiterate. Put that under looks. Okay, I know that's not really what she looks like, but that's still indicating kind of something of her. Also, this is an important part. This is an effect on another character. This is the narrator's father. This is how her mother and father met. So this part here, when she breaks her arm, that's an effect on another character. You can pause the video here if you'd like to add those things. There's a lot in this particular paragraph right here. It was in the hospital that she finally learned to read and write as a way of overcoming the boredom and depression of those weeks. And it was my father who insisted on teaching her. Okay, that's another effect on other character. Father insists on teaching her. Finally learned to read and write as a way of overcoming the boredom and depression of those weeks. You can definitely put maybe thoughts there, because depression and boredom is kind of like a thought, so you can definitely put that there. In return for stories of her adventures, he graded her first exercises. He bought her her first book, and over her bold letters, which the pale guides of the penmanship pads could not contain, they fell in love. That's an action. Definitely add that to your graphic organizer. I wonder if my father calculated the exchange he offered, one form of flight for another. For after that, and for as long as I can remember, my mother has never been without a book. Until now, that is, and it remains the greatest difficulty of her blindness. Since my father's recent death, there is no one to read to her, which is why I returned, in fact, from my failed life where the land is flat. I came home to read to my mother, to read out loud, to read long into the dark if I must, to read all night. Okay, this is the effect on her daughter that she has. She is returned home. You should definitely add that to, effect on others. So from this point forward, I'm not going to give you any more verbal hints or answers. I'm just going to read the remainder of the text. Once my father and mother married, they moved on to the old farm he had inherited but didn't care much for. Though he'd been thinking of moving to a larger city, he settled down and brought in his practice in this valley. It still seems odd to me when they could have gone anywhere else that they chose to stay in the town where the disaster had occurred, and which my father in the first place had found so constricting. It was my mother who insisted upon it, after her child did not survive. And then, too, she loved the sagging farmhouse with its scrap of what was left of a vast acreage of woods and hidden hay fields that stretched to the game park. I owe my existence the second time, then, to the two of them in the hospital that brought them together. That is the debt we take for granted, since none of us asks for life. It is only once we have it that we hang on so dearly. I was 7 the year the house caught fire, probably from standing ash. It can rekindle, and my father, forgetful around the house and perpetually exhausted from night hours on call, often emptied what he thought were ashes from cold stoves into wooden or cardboard containers. The fire could have started from a flaming box, or perhaps a buildup of creosote inside the chimney was the culprit. It started right around the stove, and the heart of the house was gutted. The babysitter, fallen asleep in my father's den on the first floor, woke to find the stairway to my upstairs room cut off by the flames. She used the phone, then ran outside to stand beneath my window. When my parents arrived, the town volunteers had drawn water from the fire pond and were spraying the outside of the house, preparing to go inside after me, not knowing at the time that there was only one staircase and that it was lost. On the other side of the house, the superannuated extension ladder broke in half. Perhaps the clatter of it falling against the walls woke me, for I'd been asleep up until that point. As soon as I wakened, in the small room that I now use for sewing, I smelled the smoke. I followed things by the letter then, was good at memorizing instructions, and so I did exactly what was taught in the second grade home fire drill. I got up, I touched the back of my door before opening it. Finding it hot, I left it closed and stuffed my rolled up rug beneath the crack. I did not hide under my bed or crawl into my closet. I put on my flannel robe and then sat down to wait. Outside, my mother stood below my dark window and saw clearly that there was no rescue. Flames had pierced one side wall, and the glare of the fire lighted the massive limbs and trunk of the vigorous old elm that had probably been planted the year the house was built, 100 years ago at least. No leaf touched the wall, and just one thin branch scraped the roof. From below, it looked as though even a squirrel would have had trouble jumping from the tree onto the house, for the breadth of that small branch was no bigger than my mother's wrist. Standing there beside father, who was preparing to rush back around the front of the house, my mother asked him to unzip her dress. When he wouldn't be bothered, she made him understand. He couldn't make his hands work, so she finally tore it off and stood there in her pearls and stockings. She directed one of the men to lean the broken half of the extension ladder up against the trunk of the tree. In surprise, he complied. She ascended, she vanished. Then she could be seen among the leafless branches of late November as she made her way up and along, her stomach inched the length of the bow that curved the branch that brushed the roof. Once there, swaying, she stood and balanced. There were plenty of people in the crowd, and many who still remember, or think that they do, my mother's leap through the ice-dark air toward the thinnest extension, and how she broke the branch falling so that it cracked in her hands, cracked louder than the flames as she vaulted with it toward the edge of the roof, and how it hurtled down end over end without her, and their eyes went up again to see it had flown. I didn't see her leap through the air, only heard the sudden thump and looked out my window. She was hanging by the backs of her heels from the new gutter we had put in that year, and she was smiling. I was not surprised to see her, she was so matter of fact. She tapped on the window. I remember how she did it, too. It was the friendliest tap, a bit tentative, as if she was afraid she had arrived too early at a friend's house. Then she gestured at the latch, and when I opened the window, she told me to raise it wider and prop it up with the stick so that I wouldn't crush fingers. She swung down, caught the ledge, and crawled through the opening. Once she was in my room, I realized that she had on no underclothing, a bra of heavy-stitched cotton women used to wear, step-in lace-trimmed drawers. I remember feeling lightheaded, of course, terribly relieved, and then embarrassed for her to be seen by the crowd undressed. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. I know that I said I wasn't going to give you any other hints, but I think that this part is really important. Think of if you were having to go save someone from a house fire. That's what's going on here, is that her mom is trying to save her daughter from a house fire. Do you think that you would be super calm and all you would do would be to, let's see, what does she say? I was not surprised. She was so matter of fact. She tapped on the window. I remember how she did it too. It was the friendliest tap, a bit tentative. So this is indicating here that Anna is really, really calm. She's just very calculated, very calm. She goes, up through the up on the branches, kind of flies and climbs on the tree, takes her old trapeze skills and puts them to use in saving her daughter. So that's definitely something that I would add to my graphic organizer because it's indicating that she's very calm. Okay. I was still embarrassed as we flew out the window toward Earth, me in her lap, her toes pointed, as we skimmed toward the painted target of the firefighter's net. I know that she's right. I knew it even then. As you fall, there is time to think. Curled as I was against her stomach, I was not startled by the cries of the crowd or the looming faces. The wind roared and beat its hot breath at our back. The flames whistled. I slowly pondered what would happen if we missed the circle or bounced out of it. Then I wrapped my hands around my mother's hands. I felt the brush of her lips and heard the beat of her heart in my ears, loud as thunder, long as the roll of drums. Okay, so go back to your graphic organizer and just make sure that you have everything filled out. I completely understand if you do not have every single box for speech filled out, but I do need there's definitely at least 2 here. Okay, so fill out as much as you can. I know I said at the beginning of this video that I needed every single one filled out, but just fill out as much as you can. I actually deleted a whole bunch of boxes that were on this assignment and what you are required to do, so I let a lot of those go. Okay, when you are ready, go ahead and go to the next assignment here, which is assignment 3C, and pause this video here and make sure your graphic organizer is finished. So this is the last part. Hopefully you enjoyed reading the text, The Leap. This is an incredibly relevant text for our lives today. We're still kind of talking about that idea of survival, and that's a big theme in our lives today with this global pandemic. So if you're ready to move on, you're set to finish assignment 3C, locate that activity, and you are going to craft your response in the space provided. So let's just go to that assignment back on here. Follow along as I read. Based on reading The Leap by Louise Erdrich, how does the author characterize Anna Avalon? Describe how the author has developed her characterization through speech, thoughts, effects, actions, and looks. Be sure to cite textual evidence and explain the conclusions you can make about Anna based on the details that you've captured in your graphic organizer. Okay, so once again, you're using recesses just like you did last week. Please understand that you are doing it a little bit differently than you normally do in that you have 3 different quotes that you are using. I want 3. It does need to follow this. Your quotes should come directly from this. You already did all the heavy lifting here. Now you're just going to analyze it. So I would suggest just picking a quote that from the S, T, E, or whatever combination you want to. You don't have to do 2 quotes from speech or 2 quotes from thoughts or whatever you want to do. However you want to do it, it is up to you. But I do need to have 3 quotes here. You're just going to type out your response here. Okay. When you are finished with that, you are going to work on your last assignment. This is the same as every week. You're just going to be reading at least 4 times per week for 20 to 30 minutes. You're going to tell me the title of the book, the author, and the number of minutes. So just don't forget to fill that out. I want to make it clear again because we were having some issues this last week. Make sure that you are just reading 1 book. I do not want every day that you are reading a different book. I want you to stick with the same book until you finish it. Okay. I sincerely appreciate you guys engaging in this lesson for the day, for the week, excuse me. I look forward to next week's lesson. If you need any assistance, remember that I am online on the live sessions every single day, Monday through Friday from 9:30 to 11:30 in the morning. You can always reach out to me via email, Remind, or on Teams. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Don't forget to smile every single day.